Have you ever thought that every single choice you make affects your life now and in the future? My name is Gerad Kite, and I'm a 5-element acupuncture master and psychotherapist. Over the past 35 years, I've worked with thousands of people coming for help with everything you could ever imagine. What fascinates me the most is what seems to be a distinct lack of awareness around the choices we make and the implications of those choices, for better or for worse. In this podcast series, we're examining the power of choice, that by consciously choosing how we think, how we feel, the actions we take, all shape our lives and our future. So if you're ready for some hard-hitting, heartbreaking interviews with people about their choices, join me here on The Power of Choice. Welcome to this first episode of a series focusing on choices around fertility and children. My first two guests share with me the choices they've made around egg donation. It's a really emotive topic, and in this episode you'll hear two very different choices and perspectives on the subject. At the end, I'm joined by a young man who is himself donor conceived, and we reflect on both the interviews. It's really fascinating listening. Good morning, Sam.
Good morning, Gerard.
Thank you so much for joining me this morning. And we're going to talk today about a choice to make egg donation. That's kind of our centerpiece. But obviously, I want to talk to you and hear about your story. And I know you're always keen to tell your story. Just tell me, how far back do we have to go when we're talking about you thinking about having a family, fertility, all of those things?
Well, I think we should probably just go back to the time when I first met my partner, who is now my husband, because that was quite late. That was age 40. So already I was on the wrong side of fertility in terms of it being easy. Yeah, I think that's probably the best starting point.
Okay. And was there any reason that it was a later start?
Well, I hadn't met the person that I
Okay.
was going to be with long term. So when me and my partner met when I was 40, we started talking about 18 months into the relationship about being serious about committing and having children. And I went and had a fertility test, and I was told from the fertility test that everything looked good and we should get going straight away. No one at that point.
So when you were, say, in your early to mid-30s, was it a concern for you that you might miss that possibility of having kids? I mean, or was that not on your radar?
It wasn't really on my radar. And I think that's the same with myself and a lot of women of my generation. You know, we were enjoying ourselves, we were having careers. And if we didn't find ourselves in a relationship, that kind of felt okay. I had a lot of peers who were in similar situations. A lot of those ended up having babies maybe in their late 30s, relationships later in their late 30s. But it's quite different now, I think, with younger generations. With our generation, with a lot of women who just didn't get round to it in their 30s. And there wasn't a conversation about it like there is now.
Yeah. When you were with these previous partners that weren't so suitable, did you ever think about compromising yourself for the sake of having kids?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't in my mind at that stage.
Okay.
I wasn't specifically thinking. I knew that I wanted to have kids, but it just wasn't part of the conversation with those. I mean, it wasn't in my 30s. There were some relationships that could have been long term, but I knew they weren't the person that I wanted to be with. And I wanted to be with the person first and foremost, longer term, before having children. And actually, when I moved back to England, I think in England the conversation might have been louder than the conversation in Australia about women having sperm donation and having babies on their own. My oldest friend we were all about 38 at the time, had been looking into sperm donation and having a baby on her own. That wasn't part of any conversation that I'd had, and hadn't really thought about it. It just wasn't a live topic in Australia at the time, but obviously in London it had been. That sort of introduced me to the first idea of donation, the first time I'd really heard about it or thought about it.
Was there any question of egg freezing at that time?
Well, interestingly, I remember coming back to the UK and my mum having ripped out an article in a magazine about egg freezing. I must have been about 36 or 37, and her suggesting it. But it was something that was quite new at the time and something very expensive at the time. And a world of the unknown, but it was mentioned to me again. It was in the UK, so it wasn't something that was live for me, wasn't going on at the time, but that was the very first time I'd heard about it. I mean, I do feel if I was my younger self now, I would tell my younger self to freeze my eggs for sure.
Yeah. When you met your husband, how quickly did you know that this was the man for you to have kids with?
I can't remember exactly, but about a year into the relationship.
Okay.
It wasn't like a sudden rush.
Yeah. So there you are at 41, and you realize this is now the moment, this is the time. Was there any sense of panic about age, or were you confident at that time?
I wouldn't say there was panic, but there was definitely a sense of I knew I needed to get on with it. And that's why I found the clinic and went and had tests. I think it was just, what was it called? Groupon. I remember seeing on Groupon some special offer from some fertility clinic to have a whole package to have fertility tests. And we talked about it and went and both had the tests and everything was good. All the levels are still okay. And I specifically remember the doctor saying, go for it, go crazy, start doing it. And we did. It took a few months till he was ready. And then we started. When I was 42, we started.
Right.
We used ovulation predictor kit. And I got pregnant on my very first time of trying based on the ovulation kit.
Yeah.
Which we were completely shocked about, presuming it would take time. And that pregnancy went okay until I had the 10-week, 12-week scan when I found the baby had Down.
Wow.
That was my first proper experience of being pregnant. So I went through, that was hard. I went through the morning sickness and,
really
and you start to get used to it at that time. Yeah, it's not like a 5 or 6 week miscarriage.
Do you remember how you dealt with that at the time?
I think I was very rational about it. I tried not to connect because I hadn't been trying for a long time and it was still a shock to us that we got pregnant quite quickly. I tried not to connect to the baby, what was growing inside of me. In a very sort of rational way, decided we were going to terminate, and that was, and then we sort of worked it out from there. And obviously, it was emotional, but it wasn't horrific.
And I'm guessing you felt confident you could conceive again, seeing as it happened so fast.
I think that's the thing. I think had he been trying for months or years, and that would have happened, it might have been a different conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting how unique this process is for everyone.
Absolutely.
And how you do rationalize what happens and kind of change the plan. When was it you started coming to see me for treatment?
I think it was around that time. I think it might have been just after we got married. Exactly. I'd seen you and I was also seeing a couple of different gynecologists go through. I had to get through this, my naturopath. She wanted me to have all sorts of scans and tests, physiological tests, as well as all the blood tests and everything else that I was doing. And I went to see a wonderful gynecologist, Yehudi Gordon, who's retired now. And he was the first person who mentioned donor to me. He said, I must have been about, I reckon that's probably, you're right, about 43, maybe heading towards 44. And it was a shock to me. And it just wasn't really on my radar. And in my mind, I was on this journey and I wasn't going to go to that place. I hadn't even decided I wasn't going to that place. It just wasn't in the conversation in my head. But that was the first time it was mentioned to me, but I kind of didn't do anything with it at that stage.
I think it's very brave, particularly at that time, for people to suggest it, because it is a shock to most people. I know personally, I would never dare mention it. Nowadays, I do more so because it is more accepted and there's more information out there. But it's a scary thing for people, I think, even 10 years ago.
It's like you threw it out there. It's something he obviously discusses with lots of people, but it's still a relatively new conversation to have. It wasn't particularly prolific as a topic. And I think after he mentioned it, someone else, I can't remember who it was, mentioned it, and I was got to be a little bit upset because essentially it was someone saying to me, you might not be able to have a baby with your own eggs. That's what it was. And that sort of hit, obviously, a sore point. It wasn't something I really wanted to hear. I mean, eventually we got to the stage where we kind of knew, we talked about it over time and knew that was at the very end of if we didn't have a baby with IVF. We knew there was something there. Eventually we came to terms with the idea of the fact that was there.
Do you remember the first conversation you had with your husband about the possibility of egg donation?
What I remember is when we slowly talked about it, is that for him, it was I think I got used to the idea of it at that stage. After in this period of time, we had a couple more miscarriages and we'd started on an IVF journey. But once I'd got my head around the idea of maybe it would be a possibility, I started to try to find the words to be able to talk to him properly about it. But he couldn't get his head around it. I suppose the idea for him, and I reckon this is true for many men, is the idea of having someone else's baby. That's almost what it was like for him. He was married to me and with me, and I mean, it's hard enough anyway for a male, the idea of going through IVF, that they're not just impregnating you naturally. The fact that, they have to go to a fertility clinic and that provide their sperm and all that stuff is very hard for a man to get their head around what they're actually doing. So this is another level of, it might be that you have to impregnate another woman's eggs. It's way beyond where his headspace could go. So it was definitely not acceptable at the beginning.
Do you remember how you felt delivering the news? Because a lot of people that I've worked with have talked around, some shame around it, or feeling like they failed, and kind of coming from that place. I mean, it's a question, but
it was a gradual conversation with us. We went on to the States to do some IVF with some guy who said he was a specialist in older women. It didn't work. We then came back here. We were doing some more naturopathy work. We tried again. We did some batching. Finally, if you remember, we did the final stage where we did 4. So eventually we found this doctor who was wonderful and said, look, let's do some batching. And do you remember that? And then we did 3 rounds month after month. And he boosted all the medication, and he got lots more embryos than ever before. But what we decided to do was do the chromosomal testing, because we hadn't had any luck, and because we'd had the Downs termination at the beginning, and we didn't want to go through the trauma of being pregnant and then having to have another Down situation. My husband and I are on this journey together all the way through. So the donor thing became part of the conversation, because every time there was some kind of failure, when it got to the batching stage, we knew that this is the last go. Otherwise, we were kind of saying, look, it's a bit like we're flogging a dead horse. If this doesn't work at the end of it, we felt like we'd sort of done everything and thrown everything at it. So
when you reflect on this, it's quite a long period of time. Do you remember how you coped with it, how you dealt with it? Even though it's a process, it's a lot to contemplate and choices you've got to make every step of the way.
Absolutely. I think I'm really lucky, because I think a lot of people find it very difficult to deal with. Somehow I had this inner strength that allowed me just to soldier on. I just had this end goal in mind. I didn't want it to beat me down. I was just determined.
Can I just pick you up on this, the end goal? This is something that is interesting. Was that the case for you, that you would almost consider anything?
I feel like my end goal was to have children. I don't know if I would have gone as far as adoption. Eventually, I kind of came to the fact that donor was there as an option. And actually, this oldest friend of mine, who many years ago, before that, had talked about sperm donation, she in the meantime had a partner and had done egg donation, and I knew unsuccessfully, I knew other people that had done it. So it kind of felt like it gave me hope. So I felt like it got to the stage where we knew that egg donation would hopefully bring us the dream of having a child. I didn't contemplate beyond that.
At the point you decided to actually do it, were you totally comfortable? Were you resolved that this is what was going to happen and that was a good thing, or was it some reluctance?
No, at the point we decided to do it, what we did was when the last round of batching and it didn't work, we went to the DCN, the Donor Conception Network, who are incredible, and we did a workshop with them for couples. And they'd have heterosexual couples, homosexual couples, single people. They are an unbelievable organisation for anyone that's contemplating donation in any way, sperm or egg donation. And we did a workshop which involved 12 other couples who were going through a variation of the same. Many of them were sort of similar age to us. Some of them were younger and, had early menopause, all sorts of stories. And that was amazing, because that really brought to life you're learning about and seeing videos of people who have had donor children, and it allowed it to sink in that this could be a real possibility, and this is it. I think by that stage I knew that that's what we were going to do. Right. I think it helped my husband just come to terms with it, and I think he was always a little bit reticent. He was determined as I was. He wanted it to happen. He knew how much I wanted it. I think my desire to for it to happen just spurred him on. He was happy to be on the journey, and once we decided, we were off, and that was it. We just wanted to make it happen.
And then, of course, the next big choice to make is the donor.
Absolutely.
Was that an exciting prospect, or was it daunting?
It was daunting. it was incredibly daunting. It was almost like, I describe it as almost being like, internet dating, just kind of
Yeah.
looking at these profiles. And we decided, to be clear, we decided to do it in the States because we're Jewish and we wanted to find specifically a Jewish donor. And you don't really have access to that kind of thing in the UK. Also in the States, you get a lot more information. You see adult photos. That just felt to us like a better option for lots of different reasons. I knew people that have done it in the UK and had exactly the same results as us, and they're in the same place now. And obviously it's quite different in the UK. And it's also significantly more expensive in the States as well. But we decided that was the path for us.
How quickly did you decide on the donor? Was it a long process?
No, it actually wasn't, because we were lucky. There wasn't a huge pool of donors in this agency that we went to. We chose a couple that we liked the look of. It was just weird. I mean, it's very weird for my husband to look at photos of grown women who were sort of in their early 20s and be choosing someone. It didn't make sense. And I was looking at them thinking, okay, I want their traits to be more like me and to be a balance with my husband in the same way that I am. I want them to have a not dissimilar look to me, colouring wise, etc. There were certain traits that we were looking for. So, but it was weird for him. It was a very weird process for him. But he just was I'm very fortunate that he was happy to sort of let me lead on that. Also, the one we actually chose, we were lucky because she also had eggs in an egg bank, which A, made it significantly cheaper for us, and B, she'd had success with that route. I mean, it was very important to us to find someone who was a proven donor, not a first-time donor, because we wanted to give this the best out possible. And she was a proven donor with both the frozen eggs and with fresh eggs. And we just, I think, it was probably, in some ways, possibly a bit of a rash decision. We didn't go to millions of clinics. Obviously, I did my research and tried a couple of clinics. And the choice to us, because we were looking for a Jewish clinic, wasn't huge. But, we were just on the mission, really. And we found someone and we were like, let's just go for it. And
Can I just ask about this whole thing about the genetics is also a big one that comes up for people. And this thing about wanting it to feel part of us. And obviously you wanting to have a Jewish donor. How important are the genetics for you? Or did you do much research into that?
Yeah, I did. I mean, when a lot of the work that you do with the Donor Conception Network is getting your head around the genetic side of things. I think that for me, through the whole journey, was the hardest thing to get my head around. The idea of, as I'm sure most of them would say, of having a child that's not going to have any genes from me. I mean, I did a lot of reading about epigenetics, which is what Yehudi Gordon talked to me about. And the epigenetics is essentially my contribution.
Yes, and a huge contribution.
In the minute that the embryo would be inside of me, every bit of nurturing that I would do to this embryo and baby in the womb, I had a possibility of contributing to, because I hadn't contributed to the genetics. But that was definitely one of the harder things for me through the process. However determined I was to make it happen, that was for me the thing to get my head around. It didn't ever stop me in my tracks. Not once I got my head around the idea. It didn't make me fall back. It became a bit of a rational thing.
Was it hard prior to the transfer of the embryos, or was it throughout the pregnancy?
No, it was always prevalent, sometimes, I mean, I had a wonderful pregnancy and obviously we've not talked here about the fact that I had twins in my belly, and I had a wonderful pregnancy and I loved being pregnant. I was so delighted I was pregnant. It didn't affect me that they weren't my eggs, but there were just strange moments in my mind of, is the connection going to be there? You wonder, am I going to feel like other mothers do when they have the eggs that are genetically their own? You're always just wondering, is it going to feel like it should feel?
Yeah.
And it didn't make me have, I know other people that have gone through this process and have definitely had to have counselling throughout their pregnancy because it can really affect them. I didn't need to have that, but it was, questions that I asked. I did do reading about it and I did talk to other people about it.
My memory of you throughout that time was that you were incredibly grateful and optimistic and excited, which, I mean, the epigenetics theory is, the environment is the most important thing, and how you are on every level is going to have an effect on the growing babies. Was that a conscious choice, do you think, or was it really that it was just a marvelous thing that was happening?
It was a marvelous thing that was happening. I was excited. I was grateful. I was on the journey, and we were incredibly lucky because we got pregnant on our first try with twins, which was amazing. And it was really worth the investment that we had before of really preparing my body to receive these embryos. I was so excited to have the boys in my belly, and I was incredibly grateful. And when I talk about these moments in my mind about being curious about will I connect with them or how's it going to be because they're not genetically mine, those are flashes. It wasn't something that overrode my pregnancy. It didn't create any kind of stress for me. I was so happy to have them, and all I wanted to do was look after them and be the best carrier for them that I possibly could. And I think the truth is, once you actually get pregnant, certainly once I got pregnant, a whole fertility journey of trying to have a baby, whether it's donor or not, all that just dissipated. It didn't matter because I was pregnant. I was in the moment with them. It all just disappeared, and it's never really come back.
Yeah. And do you mind me asking, how old were you when you had the babies?
I was 47 when I had the babies.
So it was a 5-year journey.
It was.
Starting, yeah. That's a long time.
It's a long time, and there's a lot that happened in that time, but it's definitely a long time. If I think about the moment when I was told by that originally fertility doctor, everything looks good, you're okay. I was always conscious, one thing they can't tell is what state your eggs are in. Now, it's very possible that had I been trying to get pregnant in my 30s or my 20s, I might never have had eggs that were great, but I'd never know that. It was something I was conscious of. It didn't make me think, damn it, why didn't I try early? I wasn't like that. I never felt that frustration. Yeah. I just wanted to get on with it in the moment, because the truth is, who knows what would have happened if I would have tried even early. But yes, it was a long journey. And
can I ask an odd question? Obviously, having heard your story, such a positive outcome, would you recommend it to women?
Absolutely, 150%. As I've always said, I cannot imagine loving these children more if they were my own genes or not. It doesn't matter in any way, shape or form. Like, we are a normal, happy family, crazy family. And my husband couldn't love them anymore. Their grandparents couldn't love them anymore. If I ever forget, part of the donor network is about being very open with your children and having them know from an early age that there's a special woman who gave mummy eggs because mummy couldn't have a baby, and there's a special story because you don't want it to be hidden from them. You don't want them to be any surprises for them as they get older. That was a difficult thing to say when they were babies, but I just tried to spit the words out and make it part of our norm, and it is part of our norm. Though the boys aren't very interested in it. And
how old are the boys now?
They're 6.
6. So you've had the early conversations with them, or the story, I'm assuming.
Very much so. There's the books from the DCN, Donor Conception Network, that you literally read to the children when they're babies. And I literally, I remember putting them, having them on my lap, breastfeeding them when they were tiny, knowing that this is a conversation, something I needed to say, literally trying to spit the words out, going, come on, got to start getting these words out and learn how to say it, and learn to be comfortable with it. And I did. And I said, oh my God, this sounds, just me and them talking. And I did from a very young age. There's a special kind lady who gave mummy an egg. And mummy, you are here because of that special kind lady. And mummy and daddy couldn't be happier. And there's a whole little book, there's a story. And there's a whole, when they get to age 7 or 8, there's another story about finding their genetic makeup and what the next stages are of the development, just so they have their story. And some people choose not to tell their children, but the DCN highly recommends it.
This podcast series, the theme is choices. And what I'm aware of with people in your situation, that there are so many conscious choices you have to make along the way, versus someone who just gets pregnant and, they're just getting on with life and this baby comes along. What has affected your ability to make good choices, would you say? Or is there anything you would say to people out there that would help? Because obviously there's no right or wrong choice. It's such a subjective, personal thing. Is there anything that you would pass on to people from your very positive experience?
There's so much to pass on to people. I think we are living in an amazing age where it's incredible that we have access to this. If I think back to people in the 60s and 70s and the amount of childless couples you might have heard about, over the years. So obviously IVF brings that to people, but there is this amazing science that we have, which will allow us to have a family. And it doesn't feel natural when you first start to think about it. And it is weird, exactly as you say, that you have to start being conscious about your journey, your fertility journey. It's that in its own right. For me, that was almost the harder part of it. not getting
Yeah.
pregnant naturally, knowing that you've actually got to get clinical about the whole thing. But my advice to people is just know it's there as an option, and it's an incredible option, and it will give you so much joy, and you will not even think about it after you get pregnant and have your children. And there's also this incredible service, the Donor Conception Network is there to support you, and anyone. They have counsellors, they have so many stories. They have, and it's not just egg donation, it's sperm donation as well. It's double donation as well. But what I'd also encourage people to do, if they were able to, I didn't think I was able to, is to probably think about it a little bit earlier and not be afraid of thinking about it a little bit earlier and being honest with yourself a little bit earlier. Because for me, the one thing I suppose that I didn't have the opportunity to have is another baby.
Right.
You know, I had the boys at 47 and I was super grateful, obviously, for having them. And luckily I had twins. I had two of them. If I wanted another baby, I would want it to be genetically identical to them. Well, a sibling identical to them. To do that, I would have had to go to the States to do it. Had I been 5 years younger, then I probably would have done it, but I wouldn't be doing it, and I wouldn't want to be. I mean, you know, had I not been able to have a baby till I was 50, then I would have done, but I wouldn't want to put my body through that again. You know, it's the age of 50, 51, because I didn't need to, and I didn't need to take the risk that might come with it. But I would definitely encourage people to really dig into it a little bit earlier, because that's the one thing that I would have liked to have done.
Thank you for saying that, because that's also a difficult thing to say to people, is because the kind of the conveyor belt or the linear approach to this is that egg donation is right at the very end normally. And often I want to say to people is, why don't we put it right at the front? Get used to it at the beginning, and then maybe you'll then do it earlier on. Just it's so that you're psychologically around it. So I think that's really, really helpful for people, just to look at all the different possibilities.
Yeah, it's a very hard thing to hear.
Yeah. How inspiring your story is, and what a gift this is for people. Because I think often people do see it as not the worst option, but the less great option to a natural conception or using your eggs. And from my experience working with people, that's just not the case. And you're a testament to that. So thank you for your inspiration, and thank you for talking with me today. It's so helpful.
You're so welcome, and I'm so happy to share my story, and I hope it inspires many women to go on the journey and have the joy that we have.
Good morning, Charlotte.
Good morning, Gerad.
Thank you so much for joining me today to talk things around fertility. And you've been a patient at our clinic for how long now?
6 months-ish, I think.
6 months. Okay, good. I'd like to get kind of the background of how you've got to this point. As I've mentioned to you before, the focus really is on talking about this idea of the conveyor belt of treatments that people start trying naturally, then they go to IUI, IVF, and then of course there's the possibility of egg donation. And this is a big subject at the moment, and I'd be really fascinated to hear where you stand on that, so we can get your perspective on all the options available. Can I just start by asking you how you got to be where you are now in relation to fertility?
So started doing IVF at the beginning of last year, having discovered that we couldn't conceive naturally, like how most people kind of come across IVF. So it was deciding that we wanted to have children, to have a family. It was the route that was recommended after the various tests that you do initially to find out what the problem might be or what you could do to rectify it.
Do you mind saying what the diagnosed problem was, or was it unexplained?
I think it's a mixture of things. I've been pregnant before. I've been pregnant 3 times in my life. So doing IVF was something I had said that I would never do. But, that was from a place of finding getting pregnant really easy, up to the point where I really wanted it to happen.
When you say would never do, because it had been easy, or because you were against it in some way?
I think partly because it was easy. And secondly, I've never been what I would describe as kind of baby crazy. Having children is not the be all and end all for me. It isn't something that has been continuously on my mind for the past decade or however long. I felt that if I was going to have a child, it would happen. And then you get to a point where it doesn't happen. And so you reassess your options, don't you? Or look at what you might do instead.
Having been successful in conceiving 3 times before, did not conceiving feel like a failing in some way?
I suppose it feels like a failure in that it's not happening. It didn't feel like a failing of myself or anyone else, really, because it just, it can and can't happen. I've had friends that have fallen pregnant very easily, exactly when they wanted, and gone on to have healthy babies. I've had friends that have had IVF and have failed and then succeeded. I've had friends that have had miscarriages and stillbirths. So I've had that really well-rounded view. I think that's one of the benefits of getting older and doing IVF, is that you can see the path down which so many people travel, and it prepares you, I think, for, if you do want to conceive and have a child, and the kind of pitfalls that might be in your way. So nothing has felt unexpected, really. It doesn't feel like a failure. I think you talk about an IVF round failing. Yeah.
I'm just thinking of this kind of conveyor belt. You are at any given point, and you hopefully don't have to move on from that. So I guess at this point, you're in the IVF area. When you look forward, if you do, to what happens if this doesn't work, how do you perceive what some people see as the next step, which would be egg donation, from where you are right now?
Yeah, it's something I've thought about, but I think that I have ruled out. I think I've just done, so I said that I've been pregnant before. I don't have any children. I had a termination when I was very young, and then I've had a couple of miscarriages. But I've just done my 3rd round of IVF and my 3rd embryo transfer, and it didn't work. And in the aftermath of something like that, I think you give a lot of thought to what next. And I think directly afterwards, you think, right, next round of IVF or never again. And I had all of those emotions, but throughout all of the process and all of the rounds I've done, I've never really considered egg donation for me.
Has it been suggested to you by anyone?
Yes, it was. After my 2nd round of IVF, which was awful, I consider myself very lucky to have had some NHS treatment. But looking back and comparing it to my most recent treatment at a new clinic, the care was not good, and the rounds were disastrous. And the follow-up consultation I had with the consultant following that disastrous 2nd round, she mentioned egg donation. Maybe you should think about egg donation, in the same way that you might say to someone, have you tried the tea instead of the coffee? It was just thrown out so casually. You're 40, do an egg donor, you'll have success, don't worry about it. And I think that day, I hadn't taken any time off work up until that point, time off for appointments, but I hadn't ever called in sick. I hadn't taken extended leave. But that day, that consultation really, really threw me, because I just felt that it was just a complete giving up of all hope by a medical professional that it would ever happen for me. And I took half a day off work. And I just remember feeling absolutely devastated. Like, is that the end of the road? Because for me, having already decided, no one had asked me about egg donation before at that clinic. So for someone to say, give up, do egg donation, really felt like the end of the road for me at that point. And it was as good as saying, stop trying, to me. But it was so casual, and I think kind of thrown out.
Did you follow up with the clinic, having had that bad experience? Because that sounds like bad on bad from what you say.
I didn't follow up. I fed back. I had made various complaints about the clinic up until that point, and I submitted a complaint that was never properly responded to. That consultant that mentioned it that day, I'd never actually met her. It was a couple of telephone appointments, and she was the only consultant I spoke to more than once. So she didn't know me at all, had never met me, hadn't gone through that journey with me, was only aware of me once things had gone bad. So yeah, it felt, I don't want to say insensitive, because I know that lots of people do egg donation, and it is a very natural follow-on. And for some people, that would have been suggested, and they would have been like, yeah, maybe we will. Thanks for the info. That's a great idea. But for me, I think the casualness of it, I found quite shocking.
Yeah, it's a very sensitive and subjective area, this. And Yeah, I think it needs to be handled very carefully. It's what I've noticed over the last 5-10 years, of course, that it is becoming, for some people, even a first choice, just because they can't afford to go through rounds and rounds of IVF. So I'm very aware that it's in the conversation now. And what I've noticed is that there seem to be the two camps where people become very enthusiastic about it, have wonderful experiences, and almost sell it. And then, of course, there's people on the other side, like in your case, where you're still in a process of hoping for this more natural outcome. I know it's hard to say, but if this doesn't work with IVF, do you think you could find peace with ending the journey there?
Yes, I do. And I want, if and when we will stop IVF, whether, it's because it's successful or it's not, but I want that to be a positive choice. I will, and I said this to my new consultant, who's absolutely lovely, I will not be here in 10 rounds time still doing this. I just won't. That's not me. I have a very good friend who was successful on her 4th round and has a gorgeous baby now. And she said to me, if that baby hadn't have happened, I would still be going, 4 years later, I would still be here. I'd still be going. I don't see that for me. And I want stopping to be, as I've said, a positive choice. I don't want to be kind of resigned. I don't want to give up. I want to end the process thinking, you know what, done what I could. It's maxed me out financially, emotionally, physically, whatever it is, whatever the point I get to. And I want to say I gave it a really good go, and then to move on from that. I think that I could have a good life without children, and I don't want to be a shell of myself, having gone through this for years and years and almost destroyed every other part of my life in the process. That's how I see it.
Yeah. Obviously, in the past, lots of people went down the adoption route, which was really the only other thing available. This is, obviously years ago, before even IVF was available. Was that something you ever considered?
Yeah, I think you do think about adoption naturally as part of the process of, I'd like a family. What are the routes to do that if the old-fashioned method isn't working? It's something I know people have done, friends of friends. It's something that I might consider one day. So, it's not something I'd rule out. I think adoption is completely different, though. It's completely different in every way to IVF and egg donation. Adoption is entirely child-focused and all about the child at the centre, and everything else about IVF, egg donation, sperm donation, all of those things are entirely adult focused. There is almost no consideration given to a child born out of any of these methods, which is partly one of my problems with things like egg donation, is it's entirely adult focused. And I'm not convinced that there is a lot of thought given to any child that is born out of any of these methods.
Okay, this is really interesting, I think, for me and for people listening. Can you expand on that a bit more? Because I think that is a very important point. When you say it's adult focused, yeah?
Mm.
Can you just expand a little bit on what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think there's various aspects to egg donation that I've thought about in terms of my own kind of boundaries. And so I think that it's two-sided, the kind of process of egg donation and how it's done and how it all works, and then the resulting child at the end of it and the impact on them. I think if you start reading, if you kind of give it a cursory Google, the impact of egg donation, you will find questions like, will I love my egg donor baby? How will I bond with my egg donor baby? What's the impact of an egg donor baby on the rest of my family? There are very few questions about how will this child feel having been a child of an egg donated baby. There's very little research on it, and I have found some studies because I'm just generally interested. It's kind of part of the way that I think, is to look at it quite logically and to do lots of reading. There are very few studies on that, and there are a few, actually. I was reading a paper yesterday about the observation of mother interaction with egg donor babies versus IVF using own eggs and stuff like that. And there are differences, but there doesn't seem to be a lot out there, even looking at organizations like the Donor Conception Network? I think I've got the name right.
That's right.
Go on there. I was scrolling through case studies, the first 5 pages, and there are 9 case studies a page, all positive, all glowing, wonderful experiences. And if you try and dig a bit deeper to find, well, are there any pitfalls? Maybe there aren't, but has anyone had any experience that's tricky or outside of the kind of rosy, lovely, happy family bubble? It's quite hard to find that. And
what do you fear might be the outcome? Or what do you imagine might be the outcome negatively? For the child, I mean.
Yeah, I don't think that genetics is everything when it comes to children, because obviously people adopt and have lovely families and are brilliant parents and very, very happy children. But I do wonder about the impact of not knowing where you come from, what that has on a person. And I think that I have read some studies, and they're mainly about sperm donation, interestingly. So children born from sperm donation, about how many of those children describe the donor as half of them. 2/3 of children born by sperm donation in one particular study I read described the feeling that their sperm donor was very much their father, biological father. And also some stats in there, really interesting reading on how the father figure, not the donor, the father figure interacts with the child. Children of sperm donation feel more stressed, have more mental health problems. And I worry it's about that identity. I think it's really important that you know where you come from. And if it wasn't important, then we wouldn't all be going down that IVF route, first of all, would we? Everyone would just be jumping straight to adoption if people didn't feel that they wanted their own, in quotes, biological children. And I don't think there is a load of research on it. I was thinking, who would fund that anyway? It's not really in the fertility industry's interest to fund things that don't show nice positive outcomes.
I mean, I think it's a natural, almost organic feeling to want to have your own child, because it's the pack mentality, isn't it? It's about our survival as a species, almost.
Of course.
How strong a feeling is that in you?
To have children, generally, I would like a family. To have one of my own, I think, I wouldn't be doing IVF if it wasn't a preference. I would have explored a different route. I know people that have skipped IVF and gone straight to adoption, but I think that they're people who either decided they wanted children very, very late in life, like later in life, late 50s, 60s, or they're people who were told that IVF just wouldn't work for them. But everyone else I know who's faced fertility issues has gone down the IVF route first.
Yeah. And the difference of having your own child, genetic child, versus parenting, where do you stand on that? Or do you not see them as two separate things?
Do you mean I think an adoptive parent is a parent.
That's what I mean, yes.
Yeah, absolutely, of course. Like my thing about egg donation is much less about the genetics of it and much more about my own moral code and how I feel about how it's an industry and profit driven, and women that donate, just through my own reading and research, I'm not sure are treated terribly well. I think anything that becomes an industry that is then about profit, where there isn't a lot of research into it, is what I find morally sticky about it. It's much less about genetics for me, because I would never ever say that a parent cannot be a good parent if they're not genetically linked to that child. It's much less about that to me.
I think that's a really helpful point, because a lot of people, it is more of a moral thing. And I think that's quite hard to bring into the conversation when the scientists or the doctors are just talking very practically, because the agenda of clinics generally is to deliver a child. And I don't think the morals really come into it. But I think that's often overshadowed by, we just want an outcome. Obviously, our morality is somewhat subjective. Do you think you've been influenced by what's out there in the press and in media around this subject?
I think it's information that I've sought out, probably already with an idea in my head of what I find acceptable. So I think you naturally lean towards things that support your bias, don't you? Or you seek out information to support your view. I think there's loads out there about what a brilliant thing egg donation is and all of the other routes. There's plenty to read on that. But then there are the other stories. So yeah, potentially, I think we're all made up of stuff that we read and stuff that we absorb, for sure. whether it's something in the media or something you've read somewhere else.
Does it feel like a kind of a gut instinct that then leads you to get research around it?
I think it's a gut instinct in that that's just how my brain works. I think sometimes I would love to be more heart-led than head-led, and I really struggle with that. And I'm very logical, and I like to do all the reading, and I like to, here are my lists about what's good and bad and pros and cons and all of that. And so in that sense, it's a gut because that's just how I work.
Yes, if you were more heart-led, if the balance tipped that way, do you think that you would look at other options?
Now that I've said it, I'm not sure, because actually still being heart-led for me is about going with what I think is right.
Okay.
And in my heart, I'm not sure I could go to a clinic and hand over £10,000 for a few eggs from a woman that has been paid £700 to go through that ordeal of stimulation. And we all know it's an ordeal because all of us that go through IVF now know how horrific it can be, who's been paid a relatively small amount of money to divvy up her eggs between two or potentially more women. I don't know. It just doesn't feel right in my heart as well as my head.
This is so important, isn't it, that we all have our own place that we stand, we're comfortable with these very difficult choices, because some people would never even think about that. They're so focused on having a child, that's not even in the picture. Do you personally feel that there needs to be more broader coverage around the different issues around this, the morality and the business? And
yeah, I think there should be. I think that, when you start going into IVF and you start paying for it, you realize how expensive it is. And I think there's very few people for whom that expense isn't a considerable amount of money. And I started thinking about our conversation coming up. I know that the clinic I go to it's a private practice, but who owns it? Who's taking the money? I read one story about a very well-known clinic that I haven't gone to, where the owners took £25 million in shares last year. And I know people that have been there and had a terrible time and walked away feeling uncared for and, all of that. So there's the financial side of stuff. And once you start paying for something as the clinic, when you go for your counselling, if you want to pursue egg donation, you every clinic will say, come, you've got to do at least an hour's counselling. How objective is that counselling going to be? Or are they going to sit there and say, oh, this is a lovely altruistic egg donation. What a lovely thing for this woman to have done. I think there needs to be, and I'm not sure what it is. I'm not sure what could be kind of published or put out there about that. But it's something that I feel is lacking for sure. In my reading and research, I'm a member of lots of Facebook groups and internet forums about IVF. And I read something just a week ago from a woman who has a baby from IVF and she would like a sibling, but she doesn't have the money to pay for the frozen embryo transfer. She's got frozen embryos in the freezer that she can't afford to transfer. And at my clinic, it costs about £2,000, the basic cost plus your medication. So £2,000 is an awful lot of money for an awful lot of people. So her clinic has said to her, if she's willing to do egg donation, they'll do it for free. So if she puts her body through a whole new round of stimulation and gives away her eggs to another woman, they will transfer the embryos she already has sitting there waiting. Now, that to me, if I had the money, I'd give it to her, because to put your body through that when you already have a child and you have embryos sitting there waiting for you, it just feels terribly exploitative and it just doesn't sit right with me.
Bringing it back to you, because this is in some ways a conflict, isn't it? Because some people will do anything, literally. They mortgage their house, they'll stand on their head if they can have a baby. And what I'm hearing very clearly from you is that you have your own values and morals. And in some ways, that could stop you from becoming a parent. I'm guessing that must be a very difficult position, or am I wrong?
Not really. I think there's comfort in having your red lines.
Okay, yeah.
I think. And, mortgaging your house is different to knowing that you're potentially, that is different for me. I've got my red lines and I think it makes decision making a bit easier, to be honest, because it's not just keep trying the new thing, trying the next thing, try something else. You're not on that hamster wheel as long, I don't think. And if I don't have a child, then I hope I will look back and think that I made the right choice at that time for me and what I feel is right and what I'm willing to do.
And these choices that you're making every step of the way, how confident do you feel in your ability to make, because this is what this series really is about, to make the right choice in that moment? Because some people really don't know, and they're influenced easily by other people and situation. How strong do you feel about the choice you make?
I feel fairly strong. I think when you said this was about choices, I think I emailed you back and said, making choices is something I think about a lot, because I'm not always like many people. I think you worry you're making the wrong choice, and I certainly have that feeling. But I can't worry about what I might think in 20 years. I have to worry about now. I might not be around in 20 years. Who knows what's around the corner?
Yeah.
And I think to worry about potential regret of choices you're making now is to mistrust yourself now in the moment. I have to believe that what I'm thinking and feeling is right for me now, and that will serve me in the future. And I suppose I'm willing to find out. Come back to me in 20 years and ask me. And I hope that I'll find it interesting. And I'm sure that there will, if I don't have a child, I'm sure that there will be many moments where I look back and think, gosh, I wish I had a family. And I'm so sad I don't have a family. And what could I have done differently? Should I have gone down a different road? I'm sure there will be moments like that. I think that whatever choice you make, there's this Danish philosopher who says, do it or don't do it. You will regret either option. At some point, you're going to regret your choice. So just make one and kind of stick with it. And, have the courage of your convictions a bit, I think.
So, Charlotte, thank you so much.
Thanks, Gerad.
And I'm sure it's be really helpful for so many people.
Thanks a lot.
Listening to my two guests has been quite eye-opening for me in many ways. First of all, I think I forget sometimes how amazing it is when people have been on a long journey to try and start a family and they find the solution. And in Sam's case, she found the solution through egg donation. Everything went very well. As she says, delightfully happy with her family. And it's really heartening to see someone get the outcome that they want. And then when we come to Charlotte, it was really, really quite striking for me how she was so clear about where her red lines are. I think it's really important that we always take into account that everyone has a different perception on fertility, what it means, the moral implications, also how that sits with your own personal desire, your own personal wishes to have a family, which of course is for almost everyone that I see is an overriding factor. But Charlotte's experience and her clarity really has given me a different perspective and has made me think twice before really kind of encouraging people to go down the egg donor route before they've really thought about all the other implications. So for me, it's been very interesting to hear these two interviews back to back. I'm now going to share with you an interview I did with a young man who is the outcome of sperm donation. And I'm sure you'll enjoy hearing this, and it will give a whole other perspective on what we've heard so far. Good evening, Django.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming on tonight. I just want to say, first of all, this is a really lovely moment for me to meet you for the first time, albeit digitally, because I've kind of known you even before you were born, and I know your parents both very well. But I've got to be honest, this is the first time that I've ever spoken to someone whose parents have chosen to use egg or sperm donor. And obviously I'm dealing with people all the time who are going through the choices and the options. So this is actually a very special moment for me to actually talk to someone who is the outcome, if I dare say that, of something very important, I think, for people. So thank you for doing this. If I'm a bit clumsy at times with my language, please bear with me, because I'm in a strange place myself to some extent with this. Because, as I say, I'm very used to supporting people and advising them from the other side. So this, I'm sure, is going to be really helpful for many, many people. Can we start with, before we talk about what you've listened to with the interviews, can I just just ask you about your story in relation to donation and your experience.
Sure. Well, yeah, it's funny when you asked me to talk about this stuff. What is my experience of donation? Well, Gerard, what's your experience of, life? My experience of being a donor child is just my life. So it's not anything, I don't think it's anything specific. It's just being.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's useful. I mean, I can go into the story. I know that's a little bit more interesting potentially than just.
No, I think what you've just said is really important, because if we go back to Sam's interview, I think that case is made very strongly, where she says we're a normal family, crazy family. We're just getting on with our life. It's not a big deal. But I think for a lot of people thinking about doing this, one of their fears is that it is a big deal. There's going to be a problem. Understand that it's not been an issue for you. That is, again, so you and I are the same. We're just here, right? We're just being, and we have parents, and that's it, really, essentially. Have you thought about this? How it might be for other people if their parents have a problem with it, or?
Yeah, I think I'm not going to be representative of everyone in the same situation, and I'm sure there are many people who hold this a lot more strongly or have a lot more to feel about this than I do. I'm from a family where genetics aren't that important. I'm a child of sperm donation. My brother is adopted, so the only biological relationship in the four of us in our nuclear family is between myself and my mother. But that doesn't stop us being a family, and it doesn't mean anything to me. And so I've grown up in a position where I've grown up feeling normal, and
which you are.
That, yeah. But I haven't given it much thought, and I haven't felt missing something or lost or that pensive about it. I've considered it, and there's always discussions around it, but not very long discussions. It was like, some kids are related to both their parents, and you've got a special extra helping hand that helped you get to where you are today. But I'm very aware that for other people, there's a lot more of self-discovery to this. There's a lot more desire to know more, and there's a feeling that there's a bit more identity caught up in being a child of donation. I don't think I'm particularly representative of that desire.
I mean, from what I know of your parents, I know them both very well, and from what they've said about you, that, as you say, you are a very loving, normal family, to use that word lightly, and that's the dominant feature of your dynamic, I'm guessing, that you are a family that are just getting on with life. Do you remember when your parents actually told you about the donation?
No, it was always that there was Mum and Dad, and then there was Angelo. And Angelo was the name my dad made up, or my parents made up for the sort of the guardian angel extra bit of help. So there was Angelo, the extra guy who was in the picture, but not in the picture. And I can't remember not knowing that it was Mum, Dad, and they were the important ones. And if you really want to talk about it, there's also Angelo.
And do you remember as a kid how you kind of understood that, or how you framed it for yourself?
I'm not sure. I think it just, when you're a kid, things kind of just, you take them as they come. You're still figuring out the world. So if someone tells you how it is, there's not much to query with that. And if your parents, well, in my experience, which is, like I said, not everyone's, in my experience, when my parents told me, oh, you've got something that's different to other kids, that was just, okay, that's fine. You take it in your stride, because that's just a fact that, you're learning all sorts of stuff about in school or at home or with friends and family.
What age did you hear about Angelo?
like I said, I can't remember not knowing about Angelo. So I'm sure it was happening as soon as I could speak. But I have kind of vague memories that I'll put on my 4-year-old self of knowing. That doesn't mean that was when it started. I'm sure it started as soon as I could comprehend language. But I remember being small and I guess I was confused, but not much more. It wasn't like emotionally charged knowing this. It was, for me, it was, oh, there's this guy called Angelo, and I had sort of, not really an image in my head, but a sort of silhouette in my head of this guy. He felt like a weird extra presence that I didn't care that much about, but obviously had some thoughts about.
Did you tell your mates about Angelo, or was it a very private thing?
I don't think I never used the word Angelo. That was how and I haven't used that to describe it since being a kid. But that was, my dad names things. We would have a name for, the sat nav. And so we would have a name for the car, and we'd have a name for my sperm donor. But it wasn't weird to say that I was a donor kid. Maybe not when I was tiny, because I'm sure I did, but I have no memory of that. But definitely by the time I was in secondary school, my close friends knew.
It sounds like this has not been a problem as such in any way.
Yeah, it's never felt like a problem. The closest it's ever gotten to feeling like a problem, and not even a problem, but just a bit. I had never in my whole life experienced any sort of issue with the concept of fertility treatment until once in passing, hearing a couple of guys making a joke about donation and cuckoldry, and suddenly had a moment of like, whoa, that's really weird. That is completely at odds with my experience of life so far. And it was a moment of like, oh, maybe other people find this tricky. It was a sort of epiphany moment of like, oh, is this a tricky thing? I don't know. And then honestly, the next stage of thinking, oh, is this an issue that's tricky? The most thought I've given up to it was listening through to the 2 conversations of Sam and Charlotte.
Yeah, I just wonder because I think as you started by saying, this is normal. This is your life, and this is so. I guess it could be provocative listening to this stuff.
And I don't know. I'm sure there are other moments. There was a point when my friends, when I was probably 14 or something, and my friends were like, "Yeah, when we're older, we're going to go on a road trip to find Django's dad," and that didn't sit well with me. That made me like a bit like defensive. But again, it wasn't a problem. It was my friends like having fun, and it wasn't a problem. It was just like thought about it. Yeah.
Well, your parents are your parents. Like having known them, before you were born, that they're very loving people that who want the best for you, like any parent does. Can I just obviously I want to go back to the interviews that you've listened to. Was there anything in particular it did trigger in you?
Yeah. There were moments when, like I said, this has always been normal. So making it an issue makes it an issue, I suppose. And listening to some of it made me feel more in knots than I have felt before, I think. That's not me trying to say like, oh, this is all some repressed stuff that's bubbling up now. It's just that it's always been normal. And then there were a few things where listening to it, it made me feel just the tiniest bit, either not necessarily uncomfortable, but like there were moments of like, and that's fine.
I mean, I don't want to. Obviously, it's a very sensitive area, and part of what we're trying to do with this podcast is help people to be comfortable and to feel free to have families in the way that you've experienced it with your parents. And obviously from my end, I am often fielding lots of questions, concerns that you probably heard in those interviews. as what I'm hearing, is a strong advocate for this is normal. Is there anything that you would say to people that have doubts around it or questions around it?
I don't know. And again, now that I'm thinking about it, I guess it's not normal because it's not the most common thing. It's uncommon. Or I don't know. I have no idea what the stats are, but it definitely has always felt normal to me. I don't know what I would say to someone trying to figure it out because I have no experience of that. I have no experience of dealing with infertility and fertility treatment. I've just got experience of being alive.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Which is the easiest thing, isn't it? Just to get on with it.
Yeah, I know.
I think what's really useful is to hear that it hasn't been a problem. This is your life, and it's completely normal. I've said in another interview that, what I did for many years was, accuse my parents of not being my parents as a kind of a rejection of the way that they were with me. And I think as kids, we all either accept what's going on or we reject what's going on, regardless of what the genetic history is. I think it's about human relationships.
Yeah, and the issue of those kind of things have felt, it's a weird one. Those kind of things are definitely in every family and every, teenage life of that rejection of parenthood. It's always felt quite loaded in our household because there were moments of rejection of parents which feel like they've got some force behind them because there's a different biological link there compared to other people. But I don't know where I was going with that. There have just been times where it's felt like it's been used as a grounds for that same stuff, and it's felt for us quite particular. But it sounds like it's the type of thing that every kid goes through and every family experiences.
Yeah.
That I don't care. I don't want you to be my dad.
Exactly. Yes. I think it goes back to what's normal.
Yeah, I think that's not limited at all to those particular types of kids.
Back to the interviews. Is there anything that you learned from them that you hadn't maybe questioned or understood before?
Not really. It was just, like I said, it was just hearing. I have given thought to the fact that there is a lot of struggle that goes into it. I don't think I learned anything specifically in terms of like facts, but maybe in terms of considering people's stances on stuff. And, it's just always broadening your horizons, listening to different people's takes on things. There were a few things which I did and did not agree with personally, but
Do you mind me asking which ones you weren't comfortable with?
yeah, I had a gut reaction to hearing about the choices that were going into having a specific donor, having a specific egg donation. And again, this is me speaking as someone who doesn't find genetics important. And in fact, I suppose you could say it's part of my identity or part of my upbringing, or however you want to call it, that genetics aren't important. That it's about who you choose to spend your time with and how you treat each other. So there was something that was slightly unsettling for me, hearing about people going well out of their way to go like across the pond to get a specific donor that looks like them. Again, this is the type of thing which shouldn't be an issue at all, and rationally it's totally fine. But for me, it was like, okay, but why does that matter?
Yeah.
And again, this is me spinning things that aren't actually being said and aren't really there. But it was just the gut reaction was, okay, what's the flip side here? If you got a random donation, would that be less your child? And that's, again, it's a stupid thing to say, but that was my feeling.
I don't think it is a stupid thing to say. I think this is what's so invaluable about hearing your view on this, is that this is a highly, highly emotive area. I know that all of these questions come up for people, and it's an absolute minefield. And I think it's easy to say, well, people just want to be parents, and but the reality is it's a very, very tricky area for people. And in some ways, it's possibly easiest for you guys, maybe until you realize what goes on behind the scenes, because it's a very human thing, and it questions so many primitive responses in us and judgments and knowing what is the right way. And I think that's what was interesting with Charlotte, how she had her very clear, what she called red lines. And that was, and I really, really applaud her for that, saying, this is what I can handle and no more.
Yeah, and then there was a thing as well that Charlotte said, which was about who's it for, the adults or the children, which struck a bit of a chord with me. I can't remember what it was specifically, but... And I guess at the end of the day, it's about the children who are born and their relationships with their parents. So at the end of the day, Sam's got 2 kids who she loves, and it's great, and it's a great family. So it's not like, that this is a continuing moral thing, but it was just in that moment where it was in discussing the picking.
I mean, it's this does come down to identity, doesn't it? And how do we come to be here in this world, and who are we? I agree. The most important thing is that we are lovable human beings, and we have a family that loves us, and we go on to create our own families or friendships or whatever it is. What I do believe, though, is very helpful with what you're saying is for people just to pause and really think about ultimately how this affects other people. And I think that's what where she was coming from. And in some ways, I think it's not that it will necessarily change people's decision-making or choices, but it certainly might just give them a bit of time to consider before jumping. Because the industry kind of pushes people along, goes, okay, now it's time for this.
And like I said, I have no experience of this industry and of treatment or of infertility, as far as I'm aware. But I suppose that is a thing, thinking about what are the thoughts going into it. But I think also, for me, it's a really, maybe it's a dumb thing to say, but I want it to not have to have all of these thoughts, specifically then about like, oh, am I getting the perfect child? But wanting it to feel normal for other people because it's normal for me a bit.
Yeah.
Obviously, that doesn't mean throw your morals out the window and just do whatever you want. But there's something to me about it just being kind of fine. And that the random element being fine, the not knowing XYZ being fine, that seems kind of nice to me. Again, from a very specific perspective that's not so genes focused, which I know is different for other people.
I think that's an incredibly helpful perspective.
Thank you.
Because it's in some ways it frees people up from having to make what they see as quite hard decisions. Because as you're saying, what's offered within the industry is you have choice. You can choose this donor or that donor, and what do they look like, and what's their education. And of course, for the kind of the innocent person coming along who just wants to be a parent and love their children, they're actually confronted with this reality of, choice, which of course what this series is about what do choices really mean, and what are the implications of them.
And there's a thing for me, from a sort of borderline trivial philosophical perspective of, if you've got all these choices, are you lining up your potential babies in a line and saying, I would love you more than another? That's obviously not what is happening in the moment or at any point. But the choice part for me is like a weird potential comparison. Maybe not. Maybe it isn't. Maybe I'm really stretching this one bit of discomfort I was feeling into trying to rationalize it, when in fact it could have been that I was listening to a conversation about donation and I felt uncomfortable because it's personal to me. And now I've tried to rationalize it into a whole thing.
It's totally valid, because this is what happened when you listen to it. And I think the reality is that we're relatively emotional, irrational beings. And I think we're all going to have our own reaction to it, and that can change over time.
Yeah, I mean, there's one other thing, I don't know if this is useful at all, which is donation is, my experience is going to be different to people conceived today. Because obviously everything's changing all the time, but also there is a historical factor to this, which is that I have a specific relationship with genes and my donor father, with Angelo, and that whole world, particularly as well because I was conceived and born at a time where I cannot legally find out anything about my father. That is no longer the case. There is no legal right to anonymity when you donate anymore. So children conceived now will very likely have a different relationship to this than myself. Maybe that undermines everything I've said just now, but I just thought I would raise that since 2005, any donor child has been able to find identifying information about their donor parent. I was conceived before 2005, so I've grown up knowing that it's an unknown, and that being fine and part of my meanness. There's an element to it where I can potentially find out identifying information about any siblings I have. And in fact, when you asked me to come on and chat about this, I was like, I have nothing to say. Quick, I'll sign up to the donor sibling registry so that I have something to talk about. So I'm now in a 8-month waiting list to find out if I've got any siblings, which is an exciting development in my life. But
Yes, absolutely.
should probably tell my parents that.
I think of everyone I've spoken to so far, you've had the most to say in some ways. Because,
Really?
No, you're really speaking from the heart, and that's what people want to hear. They want to hear what's really going on. And
That's
I think
so funny.
because it's such an abstract area in some ways, because we're talking about the unknown, aren't we? I think you can only talk then from the heart. You can only share with what you feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to thank you so much for doing this. It's, as I say, this is an area that I work in, and I'm talking with people all the time about this stuff. And I know how important it is for them to have a really wide perspective on the whole situation. You know, this is not a purchasing, even though it seems like it sometimes, a purchasing kind of process. This is highly sensitive emotive stuff. So, and I think, you know, prospective parents of donor egg and sperm, they really want to do due diligence, and they really want to explore their feelings around it and get as much real information about it. And there's a lot of very kind of positive spin at the moment that, you know, hey, do egg donor, do sperm donor, it's easy. So I'm sure people are going to find what you've offered today incredibly helpful. I'm very touched. Thank you so much. It's really lovely to meet you in digital person.
Yeah.
And thank you.
You're very welcome.
I first of all want to thank my 3 guests. This journey through 3 very different perspectives has been quite amazing for me. It's really shone a light on so many areas that at times I don't take into account, and I'm sure a lot of other people don't. And particularly in the IVF world and the more medicalized aspect of fertility, it's so easily to become emotionally calloused to the more subtle areas of what this brings up for people. A lot of us working in this field are very focused on the outcome. We just want to deliver or assist in delivering what the people that come to us are looking for, which is to have a family, to have children. So I found these 3 interviews an education, in fact. I was very moved by Django's questioning and his self-effacing and vulnerable but courageous way in talking about what he just heard. I'm sure it must have been quite difficult for him in some ways, and surprising. So I hope this has all been food for thought. And for those of you who are maybe just thinking about getting help with your fertility or thinking about egg donation, sperm donation, we're not hoping to deliver the perfect outcome here, but simply to give many different perspectives and to stimulate a discussion for yourself so you can really be clear about the route you want to take and, of course, the choices that you make that are going to deliver a certain outcome. Thank you for listening to the Power of Choice podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast and found it valuable, please consider subscribing, leaving a rating or a review. Do join me next time on The Power of Choice with me, Gerad Kite.